The email arrived at 7:12 a.m., just as the coffee finished dripping. I remember that part clearly, the soft click of the machine, the smell of dark roast filling the kitchen, the quiet routine of a morning that had never once surprised me in years. I had already set a small plate on the table, folded the newspaper open to the same section I always read first, and reached for my glasses when the notification lit up my screen. Your personal loan for $48,600 has been approved. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Not in panic. Not yet. Just confusion. Because I hadn't applied for a loan. I read the sender again. A real lender. A name I recognized. Not spam, not a strange address filled with numbers. Everything about it looked legitimate. Calm? Official? I clicked. The message opened with my full name, Teresa Fletcher, spelled correctly, formatted properly, followed by the last 4 digits of my social security number. There was no greeting mistake, no awkward phrasing, just clean, precise information. Loan amount, approval date, disbursement confirmed. That was more than I spent in a year. It wasn't just a number. It was stability. For a moment I thought it had to be an error. Systems made mistakes. People clicked the wrong account. Maybe someone had typed the wrong number somewhere and it had landed on me. But then I saw the verification section. Security questions answered. Contact information updated. And the funds, already transferred. The kitchen didn't feel different, but something in me shifted. Not sharply, not dramatically. Just a quiet tightening like a thread being pulled somewhere deep inside. I set the cup down without taking a sip. The coffee was still hot. There are moments in life when you don't panic, not because things are fine, but because something doesn't make sense yet, and until it does, your mind refuses to react. I reached for the phone and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the email. It rang twice. A woman answered, her voice steady, practiced. The kind of voice that had handled confusion like mine 100 times before. "Thank you for calling. How can I help you today?" "My name is Teresa Fletcher," I said. My voice sounded normal, calm even. "I just received an email about a loan approval. I believe there's been a mistake." There was a pause, not long but noticeable. "Let me pull up your account," she replied. I could hear the faint clicking of keys on her end. I stood by the counter, one hand resting against the edge, watching the sunlight slowly stretch across the floor, as if the morning were continuing as it always had. "Yes, Miss Fletcher," she said after a moment. "I see the loan here. It was approved yesterday afternoon. I didn't apply for anything," I said. Another pause. This one slightly longer. "I understand your concern," she said carefully. However, the application was completed with all required verification. The identity check passed successfully. That word successfully landed in a way I didn't expect. "What kind of verification?" I asked. She listed them out. Date of birth, social security, security questions tied to my credit history, previous addresses, contact confirmation, every answer. Correct. I didn't interrupt her. I just listened. Because as she spoke, one realization settled quietly into place. This wasn't a mistake. "Can you tell me where the funds were sent?" I asked. Another series of clicks. "They were deposited into a checking account ending in 7819, she said. That wasn't one of mine. I knew my accounts the way some people know their children's birthdays, without hesitation, without needing to check. "I don't recognize that account," I said. "I understand," she replied. "If you believe this is unauthorized, we can begin a fraud investigation process." Her tone shifted, slightly more formal now, more structured. There were procedures for things like this, steps, reports, timelines. I should have felt alarmed, angry even. But I didn't. Not yet. "Before we do that," I said, "can you confirm something for me?" "Of course. The contact information on the application. What was used?" She read it back. An email address I recognized but not one I used. A phone number that wasn't mine. And an address, close enough to mine to feel intentional, but not exact. That was the moment it changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough. Because whoever had done this hadn't guessed. They had known. I thanked her for her time and told her I would call back. She gave me a reference number, her voice still steady, still professional, as if this were just another case among many. When the call ended, the house felt the same as it always had: quiet, orderly, predictable. But the routine had already broken. I stood there for a long moment looking at the phone in my hand, then at the email still open on the screen. Everything in front of me was clear, factual, documented. And yet none of it made sense, at least not in a way I was ready to accept. If something like this happened to you, would you assume it was a mistake? Or would you start asking questions? Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. My name is Teresa Fletcher. I'm 73 years old, and until that morning I had spent most of my life believing that if you kept things simple, careful, and organized, nothing like this could ever happen to you. I had lived in the same house in Naperville for over 20 years, paid it off quietly one check at a time, no missed payments, no unnecessary risks. My finances were not complicated and I preferred them that way. After my husband passed, I handled everything myself: bills, taxes, accounts. Not because I wanted control, but because I trusted consistency. Numbers didn't argue, paperwork didn't lie, at least not on its own, which is why this didn't feel random. It felt placed. I walked back to the table, finally picked up the coffee, and took a sip. It had already gone lukewarm. There are small details you start to notice when something is wrong. The way a sentence reads, the way a number appears where it shouldn't, the way information fits together a little too cleanly. This wasn't chaos, it was structured, careful, deliberate. And that was what unsettled me the most. I didn't move right away. I didn't start searching or calling anyone else. Not yet. Because before I did anything else, I needed to understand one thing first: how someone had known enough about me to make this look real. And that was the question I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't rush into anything. That might sound strange considering what I had just been told, but panic has never helped me understand a situation. And understanding was what I needed first, more than answers, more than action. So I sat down at the table, pulled my laptop closer, and logged into the one place that had never lied to me before: my credit report. The process was familiar. I had checked it regularly over the years, not out of fear, but out of habit. Once you've handled your own finances long enough, you learn that small details matter. A number out of place, a date that doesn't line up. Those are the things that tell you something is wrong long before anyone else notices. The page loaded slowly, as it always did. I entered my information carefully, double-checking each field before moving on. Nothing about me had ever been careless, not my accounts, not my records, not the way I kept things in order. When the report finally opened, everything looked exactly as it should at first glance. My accounts were there, my history was intact, no missed payments, no unusual balances. For a moment I thought maybe the email had been isolated, some separate system error that hadn't touched anything else. Then I scrolled down, and I saw it. A recent inquiry. The date matched the loan approval from the email. The lender's name was the same. There was no mistake there. I clicked into the details. Hard inquiry, verified application, location, listed as a branch not far from where I lived. That on its own wasn't unusual. There were plenty of financial offices within a short drive. Naperville wasn't exactly small, but something about the address caught my attention, not because I recognized the building itself, but because of where it sat in relation to everything else. It was closer to Ryan's side of town than mine. Not by a large distance, just enough to feel specific. I didn't jump to conclusions. I've lived long enough to know that proximity doesn't mean involvement. It could have been coincidence. It could have been someone else entirely. Still, I kept looking. The report listed contact activity tied to the application updates, confirmations, timestamps. It wasn't just a one-step process. Whoever had done this had followed through every stage, answering questions, confirming details, completing each requirement without hesitation. That was what stayed with me. Not the fact that it had been done, but how smoothly it had been done. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes move across the screen again, slower this time. There are certain things you notice when you stop trying to prove something and just let the details speak. patterns, connections, small pieces that don't mean anything on their own but start to feel different when you see them together. I went back to the email. There had been a section I hadn't paid much attention to before, something minor, almost easy to overlook. A confirmation line near the bottom referencing communication copies, CC recipients. At the time, I had assumed it was standard formatting, something automated, something that didn't require a second look. But now, with everything else in place, I opened it again. The email address listed there wasn't mine. It wasn't even close to mine. I stared at it for a moment, trying to place it without forcing it. The name attached to it wasn't obvious, but the structure felt familiar in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Not a stranger, not random, just not something I could quite reach yet. I didn't click on it. I didn't try to trace it or search it. Not yet, because the moment you start digging without understanding what you're looking at, you risk missing what's right in front of you. Instead, I sat there and let the information settle. Loan approval, correct identity verification, funds transferred to an unknown account, a lender location closer to Ryan than to me, and now, an email address tied to the process that didn't belong to me but didn't feel unfamiliar either. None of it on its own proved anything. But together, it began to form something else. Not a conclusion, not even a clear direction. Just a shift. A quiet movement from this doesn't make sense to this might not be random. I closed the laptop halfway, resting my hands lightly on either side of it. There's a difference between suspecting something and being ready to say it out loud. I wasn't there yet, not even close, but I also wasn't where I had been an hour earlier. Before I had been looking for an error. Now I was starting to look for a reason, and that changes how you see everything. I thought about the information required to pass those security checks, the questions they would have asked, the details they would have needed, old addresses, account histories, small things that don't exist anywhere publicly, not in a way someone could just find without effort, or without access. That was the part I couldn't ignore. Whoever had done this hadn't guessed. They hadn't stumbled into the right answers. They had known. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I had been holding my breath. There was still a part of me that wanted to dismiss it, to find a simpler explanation, something less personal, something that didn't require me to look in a direction I wasn't ready to face. But the more I sat with it, the harder that became, because the details didn't point outward. They pointed inward, toward people who had been close enough to know the things strangers couldn't. Ryan had always been relaxed with money. Small things at first, borrowed amounts, late repayments, nothing I ever thought twice about. I pushed the chair back slightly and stood walking over to the window. The street outside looked the same as it always did, quiet, ordinary, untouched by whatever had just entered my life. I let myself stay there, watching nothing in particular. Then I turned back toward the table. There were still steps I could take, reports to file, calls to make, processes to begin. But I didn't reach for the phone, not yet, because before I did anything else, I needed to be certain of one thing. Not just that something had been done, but who had done it. And for the first time since that email arrived, I realized I might already be closer to that answer than I wanted to admit. I was still standing by the window when the phone rang. It wasn't loud, just the usual tone, steady and familiar. But in that moment, it felt out of place, like something interrupting a thought I hadn't finished yet. I turned, glanced at the screen, and saw Ryan's name. For a second, I didn't move. Not because it meant anything on its own. He called from time to time, checked in, asked if I needed anything. It wasn't unusual, but the timing, that was new. I picked up on the third ring. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded normal, easy, the same tone he always used, casual, relaxed, as if nothing in the world had shifted. "Ryan," I said. "Good morning. You busy?" "No," I replied. "Just having coffee." There was a brief pause on his end, the kind that might have passed unnoticed any other day. "I was just thinking about you," he said. "Wanted to check in." I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. "That's kind of you." Another pause. Not long, but long enough. "How are things?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "The same as always." I kept my voice even measured. I wasn't testing him, not consciously. But I also wasn't offering anything he hadn't asked for. Good, he said quickly. That's good. There it was again, that small shift. Not in the words, but in the pace. A little too quick, a little too ready. I walked back toward the table and sat down, the phone still at my ear. Ryan, I said, have you heard anything about a loan in my name? The silence that followed was different. Not empty, not confused, just controlled. A loan, he repeated. Yes? What kind of loan? A personal loan. Approved yesterday. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply let the information sit between us the same way it had sat in front of me all morning. Another pause, then a soft exhale on his end. No, he said. I haven't heard anything about that. The answer came quickly. Clean, almost rehearsed in its simplicity. I let a second pass before speaking again. I received an email this morning, I said. It had my information. Everything was correct. Mom, that sounds like a scam, he replied immediately. You get those all the time now. Emails, texts, people are always trying something. His tone shifted slightly, more certain now, more instructive, as if he had already decided what this was and was guiding me toward the same conclusion. I listened. I called the lender, I said. That was when it changed. Just a fraction. Oh, he said. You called them, yes. And they confirmed the loan, I replied. They said the application passed all verification. There was a longer silence this time. I didn't fill it. You sure you didn't click on something, he asked finally, or maybe put your info in somewhere without realizing it wasn't an accusation. Not directly, but it wasn't neutral either. I'm quite careful with that, I said. I know, he said quickly. I'm just saying, these things happen. People get tricked. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. I repeated that phrase quietly in my head, because it did mean something. It meant someone had answered questions only I should have known. It meant someone had accessed information that wasn't public. It meant the money had already been moved, but I didn't say any of that. Not yet. They told me the funds were deposited into an account I don't recognize, I said instead. Then it's definitely fraud, he replied. You should just report it. Let the bank handle it. Just report it. Just let it go. His words were smooth, reasonable, almost reassuring. And that was what made them stand out, because he wasn't asking questions, not the way someone normally would. He didn't ask how much the loan was when it happened, what steps I had taken. He simply explained it away. He had done that before, turned something unclear into something smaller, easier, something I wouldn't question, moved it forward, closed it off. I rested my hand lightly on the table, my fingers tracing the edge without thinking. Ryan, I said, they had my security answers. That time the pause was unmistakable, not long, but heavy. Those things can be found, he said after a moment. Online data leaks. It happens more than people think. His voice was still calm, still controlled. But something underneath it had shifted. A slight tension. A carefulness that hadn't been there at the beginning of the call. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence sit just long enough to see what he would do with it. Mom, he added softer, now you don't need to stress about this. Seriously, just let the bank deal with it. That's what they're there for. Let the bank deal with it. Again, he was trying to move me away from it, not aggressively, not obviously, just gently. And that was what unsettled me. Because concern usually sounds different. It asks questions. It leans in. It tries to understand. This felt like something else, like a conversation being guided toward a certain ending. I shifted slightly in my chair, my eyes moving back to the laptop screen still half open in front of me. I'll take care of it, I said. Good, he replied almost too quickly. That's good. Another small silence. Then, you want me to come by later, just to check in? The offer came casually, almost as an afterthought, but it didn't feel like one. I considered it for a moment, not the words, but the timing, the call, the responses, the way the conversation had moved. I'm all right, I said. There's no need. Okay, he said. Just let me know if you need anything. I will. We exchanged a few more words, nothing important, nothing that stayed with me. Then the call ended. I set the phone down slowly, my hand resting on it for a second longer than necessary. The house was quiet again. The coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. I told myself I was just being careful. But something about that call didn't feel like a mistake, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Because now there was something inside it, something I hadn't brought in myself. A question that no longer felt distant, not confirmed, not proven, but no longer unthinkable either. I looked at the screen, at the details I had already seen, and then at the phone again. There are moments when doubt begins to take shape not as a clear answer, but as a pattern you can't ignore. And for the first time since this started, I realized something else. I wasn't just trying to understand what had happened. I was trying to understand him, and I wasn't sure I liked what I was starting to see. He arrived earlier than I expected. I heard the car before I saw it, the familiar engine slowing just outside, tires brushing lightly against the curb. I was already in the living room. By then the laptop closed, the email no longer on the screen, but still very much present in my mind. There's something about waiting for a conversation you didn't ask for that changes the way time moves. It stretches in small, uneven ways, just enough to make you aware of every second. The doorbell rang once. I walked over and opened it without hesitation. "Hey," Ryan said, stepping inside with an easy smile. I was in the area. "In the area," I repeated quietly, stepping aside to let him pass. He glanced around the house the way he always did, quick, familiar, not really looking at anything in particular. "Everything looks the same," he said. "I like it that way." He nodded, then moved toward the kitchen as if the conversation hadn't already started. "You want anything?" I asked. "No, I'm good," he replied. "I just wanted to check on you." "Check on me." The phrase settled between us, light on the surface, heavier underneath. We sat across from each other at the table. The cup was still on the table, untouched. The same table where I had read the email that morning. The same place where everything had begun to shift. Neither of us spoke. Then he leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "So," he said, "you talked to the bank?" I did. "And they're handling it. They said they would start a fraud investigation," I replied. He nodded once. "That's good. That's probably what you want, right?" I watched him as he spoke, not just the words, but the way he delivered them. Calm, controlled, slightly ahead of the conversation, as if he already knew where it should end. "Ryan," I said, "how much do you think the loan was for?" The question seemed simple enough, but it didn't land that way. He hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "I don't know," he said. "Those things can vary." "They told me the amount," I said. "I just wanted to see what you thought." Another small pause. "I mean, maybe 10,000–15,000, he offered. "That's usually how those scams work. Small enough to slip through." "Small enough." I nodded slowly. It was 48,600. The number sat in the air. He didn't react right away. Not with surprise. Not with disbelief. Just a slight tightening around his eyes, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Wow," he said finally. That's a lot." "It is." He shifted in his seat, leaning forward, now resting his elbows on the table. "Look, Mom, whoever did this clearly knew what they were doing," he said. "But that doesn't mean it's someone you know. These people are professionals." "Professionals." The word sounded practiced. "Maybe," I said. "You can't start thinking it's someone close to you," he continued. "That's not how these things usually work. Usually." I let that word pass without comment. "Do you know where the lender is located?" I asked. He shrugged lightly. "No idea. It's on Jefferson," I said. "Near the shopping center." Another pause. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, I think I've seen that place." I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence settle again, just long enough for it to feel uncomfortable. He shifted slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table before stopping. "You shouldn't go digging into this yourself," he added. "That's what the bank and the police are for." "I haven't contacted the police," I said. "Good," he replied quickly. "I mean, not yet. You should let the bank handle it first. Not yet." The correction was small, but it was there. "I'm just trying to understand how it happened," I said. "And you will?" he said. Through the process, that's what it's there for. Again, the same direction, the same quiet push. Let it go. Let someone else handle it. Don't look too closely. I rested my hands in my lap, my posture still, my voice steady. Ryan, I said they had my old address. That time the reaction came faster. Like I said, that stuff can be found, he replied. Data breaches, old records. They also had the answers to my security questions. He stopped, just for a second. Then he exhaled slower this time. Mom, you're overthinking this, he said gently. I know it feels personal, but it's probably not. Probably. I nodded once. Maybe. We sat there in silence again, the kind that doesn't feel empty anymore, the kind that holds too much. I watched him carefully, not looking for guilt, not trying to force a conclusion, just observing. And what I saw wasn't fear, it was control. Careful wording, measured responses, a steady attempt to keep the conversation within certain lines. That was when it became clear, not fully, not completely, but enough. Did you recognize the email address on the application, I asked? The question landed differently. He didn't answer right away. He didn't look at me either. I didn't see it, he said finally. It was copied on the confirmation. Oh, he replied. Then it's probably just part of their system. Probably. Again. I leaned back slightly, giving the conversation more space instead of less. You seem very certain about how this works, I said. He gave a small shrug. I read about these things, he said. It's not uncommon. No, it wasn't uncommon. But something about this wasn't general. It wasn't distant. It was specific. And he knew it. I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I let the moment pass just like the others, collecting them quietly instead of confronting them directly. Because confrontation requires certainty. And I wasn't there yet. But I was close. Closer than I had been that morning. Closer than I had been on that phone call. And for the first time since this started, I realized something else. I wasn't just listening to what Ryan was saying. I was listening to what he was trying not to say. If you were sitting here hearing this the way I did, what would you think at that point? Would you still trust him? And if you've ever seen a situation shift like this quietly without anyone saying it out loud, you might want to stay because what comes next rarely unfolds the way you expect. I didn't press him after that. Not yet. Because the truth, whatever it was, hadn't slipped. But it had shown itself. Just enough. I didn't decide right away. Even after Ryan left, even after the conversation replayed itself in my mind in quiet, measured fragments, I stayed where I was for a long time, sitting at the table, hands folded, letting the details settle into something clearer. Suspicion is one thing, acting on it is another, but there comes a point when waiting no longer brings clarity, it only delays it. By early afternoon, I had my answer. I picked up my keys, slipped on my coat, and left the house without calling ahead. Ryan lived less than 15 minutes away. The drive was familiar roads I had taken before, turns I could make without thinking. But that day, everything felt slightly sharper. Not unfamiliar, just more defined. As if I were paying attention in a way I hadn't needed to before. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. So was Lauren's. I sat in my own car for a moment, watching the front of the house. Nothing looked out of place. Curtains drawn halfway the porch exactly as it had been the last time I visited. Ordinary. That word kept returning. I stepped out, walked up to the door, and knocked. It opened a few seconds later. Lauren stood there, her expression shifting quickly from neutral to surprised. "Oh, Teresa," she said. "I didn't know you were coming by." "I was nearby," I replied, the same phrase Ryan had used earlier. She hesitated for just a second, then stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something warm, coffee maybe, or something recently cooked. It felt lived in. Comfortable. Ryan appeared from the hallway a moment later. "Mom," he said. "Everything okay? I was in the area," I said again, meeting his eyes briefly. He nodded slower this time. "Right. Of course." We moved into the kitchen, the three of us settling into a space that had likely seen 100 ordinary conversations before this one. Lauren busied herself near the counter, picking up a cup, setting it down again, wiping a surface that didn't need cleaning. "Do you want anything?" she asked. "No, thank you." Ryan leaned against the edge of the counter, arms crossed loosely. "So, what's going on?" he asked. "Nothing urgent," I said. "I just wanted to talk." That was true, but not entirely. I let my eyes move around the room, not searching, not obviously, just noticing. Mail stacked near the edge of the counter, a laptop open on the table, a small pile of papers slightly out of place tucked near the corner, not hidden, but not meant to draw attention either. Lauren moved quickly, then stepping closer to the table, shifting a few of the papers into a neater stack. A small movement, easy to miss, but not invisible. "You've both been busy," I said lightly. "Work's been a lot," Ryan replied. "Same as always." "Of course." I stepped a little closer to the table, letting my hand rest near the edge, my attention still casual on the surface. Up close, the papers weren't anything obvious. Receipts, statements, fragments of printed pages, but one sheet, just one, stood out, not because of what it said, because of what it looked like, a format I had seen that morning. Clean lines, structured sections, the kind of document used in applications confirmations, official processes. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. Lauren did. She moved faster this time, gathering the stack in one motion. "I've been meaning to sort through these," she said, her voice just slightly tighter than before. "Paperwork never really ends," I replied. "No, it doesn't," she said quickly. Ryan shifted beside me. "You said you wanted to talk?" he said, redirecting. I did, but I didn't continue. Not yet. Because the moment had already shifted, not through words, through movement, through what had just been taken away. Lauren turned toward the side of the kitchen where a small shredder sat beneath the counter. Again, nothing unusual. Everyone had one. She flipped the switch, the machine humming softly as it came to life. The sound was low at first, steady, mechanical. She fed the first sheet in without looking at it. The paper disappeared inch by inch, the edges curling slightly before vanishing into thin strips. I didn't move. The second sheet followed too quickly. Then the third. Whatever had been printed on them, names, numbers, something structured enough to matter, was reduced to something unreadable in seconds. The machine didn't hesitate. Neither did she. I glanced at Ryan. He didn't say anything, didn't step forward, didn't even look at me. The sound filled the space between us, louder than it should have been, like it was covering something that didn't need to be said out loud. By the time the last sheet was gone, the kitchen was still again. Too quiet. "I've been clearing out old documents," she said, almost casually. "One sheet at a time." The sound was steady, mechanical, final. I watched without moving, not because I needed to see what was on them, but because I understood why they were being destroyed. Ryan didn't look at me. He watched Lauren instead, his expression neutral, his posture unchanged, as if this were nothing, as if it had always been nothing. "You're right to get rid of things you don't need," I said. Lauren glanced at me briefly. "Exactly." Another sheet disappeared into the machine, then another. The pile was gone within seconds, and just like that, whatever had been there no longer existed in any visible form. The kitchen returned to its earlier state, clean, organized, ordinary. But something had shifted, not confirmed, not proven, but no longer uncertain. I turned slightly, letting my gaze move back to Ryan. "Have you heard anything new today?" I asked. About what he replied. "The loan." He shook his head. "No." "Same as before." "Same as before." I nodded. "Of course." Lauren stepped back toward the counter, unplugging the shredder. "I'm sure the bank will figure it out," she said. "These things usually get resolved." Usually, I let the word settle, because by now I understood something clearly. This wasn't about what usually happened. It was about what had already happened, and what I had just seen. Not enough to say anything outright, not enough to confront, but enough to change the way I looked at both of them, because whatever this was, it wasn't distant anymore. It was here, closer than I had been willing to admit, and for the first time since that morning, I wasn't just questioning the situation. I was beginning to see the shape of it. I didn't stay much longer after that. There are moments when continuing a conversation doesn't give you anything new, it only risks disturbing what you've already understood. And I had understood enough for that day. Ryan walked me to the door. Lauren stayed in the kitchen, her movements quieter now, more contained. "Let me know what the bank says," Ryan said as I stepped outside. "I will." The air felt colder than it had when I arrived, though the sky hadn't changed. I drove home in silence. Not because I was trying to avoid thinking, but because everything I needed to think about was already there, settled in place waiting for me to acknowledge it. The shredder, the papers, the way Lauren moved, the way Ryan didn't react. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it wasn't nothing either. When I got back inside my house, I didn't take off my coat right away. I walked straight to the table, opened the laptop again, and pulled up the report I had closed earlier. This time I didn't skim. I read everything, line by line, detail by detail. There's a difference between looking at information and examining it. The first is passive. The second requires you to accept that you might find something you don't want to see. I started with the inquiry again. Same lender, same date, same location. But further down there were additional entries, small ones easy to overlook if you didn't know what you were looking for. Login timestamps, access points, records of activity tied to the application process. They hadn't stood out before because they weren't labeled as anything significant, just technical details part of the system. Now they felt different. One entry caught my attention, an IP address. I stared at it for a moment, not because I understood it completely, but because I recognized what it represented: location, origin, a digital footprint of where something had been done. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew it mattered. I didn't know how to trace it myself, but I knew enough to understand what it meant. It wasn't random. Nothing about this was random anymore. I wrote it down anyway, carefully. Next to it I noted the timestamps. Then the account ending in 7819, the one the funds had been sent to. Still unfamiliar, still not mine, but no longer just a detail in a report. It was part of something larger. I moved to the email again, scrolling through it more slowly than before. There it was, the CC address, still sitting there unchanged. This time I looked at it differently, not as something I didn't recognize, but as something that didn't belong in the first place. Because if the application had been made in my name, why would anyone else need to be copied on the confirmation, unless it wasn't just about the application? Unless it was about keeping track, keeping someone else informed. I closed the email and leaned back slightly, letting the pieces settle. Loan approval, verification passed, funds transferred, suspicious account, IP record, CC email, and then something else surfaced. Not from the report, not from the email, from earlier. From what I had seen in Ryan's kitchen. The paper, just one sheet, but enough. The structure of it had felt familiar for a reason. I stood up and walked over to the cabinet where I kept old files, tax documents, account statements, records I had never thrown away. It took a few minutes, but eventually I found what I was looking for. An old application form. Not the same lender, not the same loan, but the same format, the same layout, boxes, sections, signature lines. I placed it next to the laptop and looked back at the image in my mind of what I had seen on Ryan's table. It matched. Not exactly, but close enough. Too close. I sat down again, slower this time. I made another cup. I didn't drink that one either, because that was when it stopped being a possibility and started becoming something else. Something structured, planned, not just a moment of opportunity, but a process. I went back to the report one more time, scrolled further, and then I saw it. A second inquiry, more recent. Same lender, same pattern, and that's when I realized this hadn't happened once. It had been happening. My hand stilled on the trackpad. It hadn't been there before, or maybe it had and I hadn't noticed. Either way, it was there now. A second attempt. Or a continuation. The timestamps lined up too closely to be unrelated, which meant this wasn't over. It was ongoing. I exhaled slowly, feeling something shift, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough to change the way everything else settled around it, because up until that moment there had still been space for doubt. Now there was less. Not none. but less. I looked at the notes I had written, the IP address, the account number, the timeline forming piece by piece. Then I thought about Ryan, the way he had answered, the way he had avoided certain questions, the way Lauren had moved those papers without being asked. It all fit, not perfectly, but clearly. And clarity has its own weight. I rested my hands on the table, letting the silence of the house return around me. Everything was still, orderly, exactly the way it had been that morning. But I wasn't. Because now I wasn't just looking at a problem. I was looking at people. People I knew. People I had trusted. And whatever this was, it wasn't finished yet. I sat there for a long moment, not moving, not reaching for the phone, not taking the next step. Because once I did, there would be no going back. I didn't make the call right away. I sat with it first. There's a moment just before you act when everything is still technically reversible, when you can still tell yourself that maybe there's another explanation, another path that doesn't change anything permanently, but that moment doesn't last. And when it passes, what remains isn't confusion. It's clarity. I reached for the phone. The number the bank had given me earlier was still in my call log. I stared at it for a second, then pressed dial. This time I didn't ask questions. "I'd like to report fraud," I said when the representative answered. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. They transferred me to a different department. The tone changed immediately, more structured, more precise. The woman on the line introduced herself, asked me to confirm my identity, then began walking through the process step by step. Dates, amounts, verification details, where the funds had gone. I gave her everything. Not just what was in the email, but what I had found since the inquiry, the second entry, the unfamiliar account number. "And you're certain you didn't authorize any of this?" she asked. "Yes. Have you shared your personal information with anyone recently?" The question was routine. Expected. And still, I paused before answering. "No," I said. She noted it, her tone unchanged. "We're going to place an immediate hold on any related activity," she explained. "We'll also initiate a formal investigation. You may be contacted by our fraud team, and in some cases law enforcement may become involved." I had already crossed that line in my mind. "Yes," I said. "I understand." She gave me a case number, told me what to expect next, advised me to monitor my accounts closely. Standard instructions. Necessary ones. But as the call ended, I realized something else. The situation had moved out of my control. Not completely, but enough. I wasn't just observing anymore. I had started something. I set the phone down and let the silence settle again. It didn't feel the same this time. It felt heavier, more defined. Like something had shifted from possibility into process. A few hours passed before the next call came. This one wasn't from the main line. It was from someone within the bank's fraud department. His voice was direct, focused. "Miss Fletcher, I'm reviewing your case," he said. "We've identified the account where the funds were transferred. We're working to secure it, but I need to ask you a few additional questions." I answered them carefully. Had I ever opened an account ending in 7819? No. Did I recognize the associated contact information? No. Had I noticed any unusual activity before the email? No. He paused, occasionally typing confirming details on his end. "There's been more than one attempt," he said at one point. "I saw that," I replied. "Yes, that's important. It suggests this wasn't accidental." I didn't respond to that, because I already knew. "We're also reviewing access points," he continued. "Login records, IP addresses, anything that can help us trace where the application originated." Trace. That word stayed with me. "Will that take long?" I asked. "It depends," he said, "but we'll move as quickly as possible." There was a brief pause. "Ms. Fletcher," he added, "based on what we're seeing, this appears to be a targeted case. Not random. Targeted." The word didn't surprise me. It confirmed something I had already begun to accept. "I understand," I said. "Has anyone else had access to your personal information?" he asked. Again, a routine question. Again, I paused. "Not directly," I said. He didn't press further. "Not yet." "We'll be in touch," he said. "In the meantime, if you notice anything else, anything at all, please contact us immediately." "I will." The call ended. I remained seated at the table, the laptop still open, the notes I had taken lying beside it. IP address, account number, timeline. All of it now part of something official, something documented, something that would be examined by people who didn't know me, who didn't know Ryan, who didn't know any of the context that had brought me here. That was when the pressure began to settle in, not as panic, but as weight. Because once a situation becomes formal, once it moves into systems, into records, it doesn't stay contained. It expands. It reaches into places you didn't intend. I thought about the questions they would ask next, about access, about relationships, about who might have known enough to do this. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not doubt, not confusion, but the beginning of consequence. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window again, the same place I had stood earlier that morning. Outside, everything was still, unchanged, but inside, something had already moved forward. The investigation had begun, and whatever it uncovered wouldn't stay hidden for long. The call came the next morning. I recognized the number immediately, the same extension from the fraud department, but this time the tone was different before a single word was spoken. "Ms. Fletcher," the man said, "we've identified the account where the funds were transferred. I need to go over something with you." I sat down before he continued. "Go ahead." There was a brief pause, like he was choosing how to say it. "The account is a custodial account," he said, "set up under a minor's name." I felt something tighten, not sharply, but enough. "A minor," I repeated. "Yes." I didn't interrupt him. I let him continue, even though part of me already understood where this was going. "The account holder is Chloe Fletcher." For a moment the room didn't change, but my understanding of it did. Chloe. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again as if that might shift something back into place. "That's my granddaughter," I said. "I understand," he replied. "Custodial accounts are typically managed by a parent or guardian. In this case, the account appears to have been accessed in connection with the loan disbursement. I didn't even think about the coffee this time. That was the moment it stopped being about money. It became something else entirely. Appears. That word gave just enough distance to breathe, but not enough to step away. "So the money," I said slowly, "was deposited into that account," he confirmed. I didn't speak right away, because this was different. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about what had been taken or how. This was about where it had been placed, and who had been used to place it there. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've flagged the account," he said. "Given that a minor is involved, we're required to notify the appropriate agencies. That includes the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, CPS." He didn't say the acronym, but the meaning was clear. "And law enforcement?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "They will be involved as well." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you for letting me know. If you have any additional information," he added, "anything at all that could clarify how this account was used, it would be helpful to the investigation." I understand. When the call ended, I didn't move. Not for a long time. Because everything that had been building, every small piece, every quiet realization, had just shifted into something else. Something heavier. It's one thing to suspect. It's another to see how far something has gone. Chloe, 15 years old. Still in school, still at an age where the world should feel predictable, safe, contained within boundaries set by the people responsible for her. And now, part of this, not by choice, not by understanding, but by placement. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen, though I didn't remember deciding to move. The house felt the same, but I didn't, because whatever I had been holding at a distance before, it was here now. There was no way to separate it anymore. The account, the transfer, the structure of it. It wasn't just about gaining access, it was about hiding it, using something that wouldn't raise immediate concern, using someone who wouldn't question it. I leaned against the counter, my hand resting lightly on the surface. For a moment, I let myself feel it. Not anger, not yet, just the weight of it. Because there are lines people don't cross, not in families, not with children. And whatever this was, it had crossed that line without hesitation. The phone rang again later that afternoon. This time, it wasn't the bank. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. "Ms. Fletcher," a woman's voice asked. "This is Megan Carter with the Department of Children and Family Services." Her tone was calm, measured. "We've received a report related to a financial account connected to a minor in your family. I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's all right." "Yes," I said. She proceeded carefully asking about my relationship to Chloe, how often I saw her, whether I had any involvement in her financial matters. "I don't," I said. "Her parents manage everything." "I see." There was a brief pause. "Are you aware of any recent changes in her household that might be relevant?" she asked. Relevant? I thought about the conversation with Ryan, the way he had redirected, the way Lauren had moved those papers. "I'm not sure," I said. "But I believe something has changed." She didn't push further. "Not yet." "Thank you," she said. "We may need to follow up." "I understand." When the call ended, I set the phone down more slowly this time, because now it wasn't just internal anymore. It wasn't just a private realization, something I could process quietly at my own pace. It was outside, involved, documented, moving forward whether I was ready or not. I walked back to the living room and sat down, my eyes settling on nothing in particular. Everything had led here. The email, the call, the visit, the shredded papers, the second inquiry, and now, Chloe. If you were in my place seeing this unfold piece by piece, when it involved a child, would you still stay quiet? Tell me honestly. And if you've ever thought something couldn't go any further until it did, you might want to stay, because the next step isn't about discovering the truth anymore. It's about facing it. I knew what the next conversation would have to be. I just hadn't decided yet how it would begin. I didn't call them. I gave them time. Not out of kindness, and not because I was uncertain anymore, but because I wanted to see what they would do when the situation moved beyond their control. It didn't take long. Ryan called that evening. His voice was different this time. No calm distance, no careful pacing, just urgency. "Mom, we need to talk." I let a second pass before answering. "We do. I'm coming over," he said. "Lauren's with me." "You don't have to," I replied. "We're already on the way." The line went quiet, not abruptly, just decided. I set the phone down and remained where I was, my hands folded loosely in my lap. This part didn't feel uncertain. It felt inevitable. They arrived within 20 minutes. No small talk this time, no casual steps through the house. Ryan walked in first, Lauren just behind him. Her expression was tighter than I had ever seen it controlled, but barely. "We need to explain," Ryan said immediately. I didn't respond right away. I gestured toward the living room instead. "Sit." They did. Not across from me this time, but closer together. A small detail, but not meaningless. Ryan leaned forward, his hands clasped, elbows resting on his knees. He reached for his phone at one point, like he wanted the conversation to end. "It just got out of hand," he said. That was how he chose to begin. Not with denial, not with confusion, but with something softer, something that suggested this had simply grown beyond intention. I let the words sit. How I asked. He exhaled, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "We were trying to fix things," he said. "Bills, credit cards. Things added up faster than we expected." Lauren spoke next, her voice quieter. "We didn't think it would go this far. Didn't think. Wouldn't go this far." Every sentence placed carefully between responsibility and distance. "You used my name," I said. It wasn't a question. Ryan nodded once. "We were going to pay it back," he said quickly. "That was always the plan. It wasn't about taking anything from you." I watched him as he spoke. Not the words, the structure of them. "We were going to..." It wasn't about... It just... All of it framed as something that had drifted rather than something that had been decided. "And Chloe?" I asked. That was the first time they both stopped. Completely. Lauren's hands tightened in her lap. Ryan's shoulders shifted just slightly. "It was just an account," he said. "A place to move the money. That's all." A place. As if it had been empty before they used it. She didn't know, Lauren added quickly. We would never involve her like that. Not intentionally. Not intentionally. I held onto that word. Because intent doesn't disappear just because it isn't spoken. You put it in her name, I said. Ryan's voice softened again. We thought it would be safer, he said. Less visible. It wasn't about her. It was about protecting the situation until we fixed it. Protecting the situation, not protecting her. I let the silence settle. This time I didn't need to guide it. They filled it themselves. You don't understand the pressure we were under, Lauren said. Everything was stacking up. We were trying to keep things together. I do understand pressure, I said calmly. And I did. But pressure doesn't rewrite choices. Ryan leaned forward again. Mom, please, he said. We can fix this. We'll move the money back, close everything out. If you just, don't take this any further. There it was. Not said directly, but clear. Don't take this any further. I've already reported it. I said. The room went still. You what? Ryan asked. I reported the fraud to the bank. Lauren shook her head slightly. No. We can handle this ourselves. We don't need to bring anyone else into it. Anyone else. As if this were still contained. It's already being handled, I said. Ryan stood up, then pacing once before stopping again. Mom, this doesn't have to become something bigger, he said. It was a mistake. A bad one, but still a mistake. A mistake, I repeated. Yes. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I spoke. That's not a mistake, I said. That's a decision. He didn't answer. He didn't look at me either. Lauren stayed quiet. No one tried to explain it. That was the moment I stopped wondering if something was wrong, and started realizing who it might be. The conversation didn't end abruptly. It just ran out. Of reasons. Of distance. Of anything that could soften what was already clear. They left not long after. Not angry. Not loud. Just quiet. And that silence stayed with me long after the door closed, because now everything had been said, and none of it had changed what came next. The case didn't move quickly, not in the way people imagine when something becomes official. There were no sudden conclusions, no immediate resolutions. Just a steady process, calls, documents, confirmations. Each step measured, each detail examined. The bank handled their side first. The account was frozen. The transactions traced. The second attempt flagged before it could go through. Everything that had once been hidden behind small movements and careful wording was now laid out in records and timelines. From there it moved into something else. Legal. I wasn't present for most of it. I gave my statements when asked, confirmed what I knew, what I had seen, what I had not authorized. The rest unfolded through channels that didn't require me to be there, only to remain available. Ryan and Lauren chose to cooperate early. Their attorney advised it. There were discussions about intent, about restitution, about avoiding something more severe. The charges were clear: identity theft, financial fraud, but the outcome depended on how they responded once everything was exposed. In the end, they accepted a plea agreement. No trial. No public confrontation, just a quiet acknowledgement documented in legal terms. Restitution was ordered, payments structured over time, probation instead of incarceration. It wasn't leniency, it was process, and process has its own weight. They didn't come to tell me. I heard it through the same channels that had carried everything else, updates, confirmations, final notices that something had been concluded, even if it didn't feel complete. A few days later, Ryan called. His voice had changed again. Not urgent this time, not controlled, just lowered. We're leaving, he said. Where? Out of state. It's part of everything. Fresh start. A fresh start. The phrase didn't carry the same meaning it might have once. When I asked, next week. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. I hope it helps, I said. There was a pause. Then I'm sorry. Not explained, not expanded, just said. I know I replied, and I did, but knowing doesn't undo anything. Lauren didn't call. I didn't expect her to. Some distances don't need to be spoken into place. They simply exist. They left quietly. No gathering, no farewell that needed witnesses, just a moving truck, a closed door, and a house that no longer held the same people inside it. Chloe stayed with them. I made sure of one thing before they left, that her account was separated from everything else. That what had been used would no longer be connected to her in any way. She didn't call me either. But that wasn't distance. That was confusion. And confusion takes time to understand. The house across town settled into stillness after they were gone, and mine returned to what it had always been. Quiet, orderly, predictable, but not the same. I went back to my routines. Morning coffee, the newspaper, the small, steady structure of days that don't demand too much from you. On the surface, everything looked unchanged, but there's a difference between a life that is quiet because nothing has happened, and a life that is quiet because something has ended. I noticed things differently. Not out of fear, not out of suspicion, just awareness. The way certain details matter more once you've seen what they can become. Weeks passed, then months. The calls stopped. The letters stopped. The process, as far as it involved me, was finished. What remained wasn't legal, it wasn't financial, it was something else, something that doesn't fit into reports or timelines. Trust doesn't disappear all at once, it changes shape. It leaves behind something quieter, something that doesn't ask to be restored, it simply asks to be recognized for what it is now. I didn't try to fix it. Some things aren't meant to return to what they were. They're meant to become something else, something clearer. I still keep my records organized, still check my accounts, still move through my days the same way I always have. But there's one difference. I don't assume anymore. Not about people, not about intentions, not about what should or shouldn't happen. And that change is enough. The coffee sat there again. This time I let it go cold. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the outcome. It was the moment I realized I didn't have to stay quiet just because it was easier. If you were in my place, would you have protected the relationship or the truth? Tell me what you think. And if this story stayed with you in any small way, leave a like, share it with someone who might understand it, and follow along for more stories like this, because sometimes the hardest thing isn't what people do, it's deciding what you do after you see it clearly. And for me, that was the moment everything changed.